Hello and welcome to The Price of Music, the show that looks at the money behind the music industry with me, Steve Lamack, and Music Allies Head of Insight, Stuart Dredge. It's a listeners' questions episode, which we do really look forward to, although at the same time, there is that kind of anxious moment when producer Guy sends the questions through, which I think, I don't know about you, Stuart, but it's a little bit, it's like that moment when you're sat in the school exam hall and the examiner says, you may now turn over your papers, and you've got your fingers crossed that the right questions are going to come up that you can answer. But anyway, this is your first question this week. Actually, one of the reasons I mentioned that producer Guy picks the questions is so that you can't accuse us of favouritism here, because this first question randomly is from someone who was in a band who I helped sign when I was co-running a record label in the 90s. Lovely to hear from you. Ant Chapman from Collapse Lung, who says, really enjoying the podcast, although I keep finding myself getting frustrated at Bandcamp not really getting talked about, and it'd be really interesting to hear your thoughts on how it can work alongside or even as an alternative to the trad music industry. For us, it's enabled us to release 4 albums, 2 of new material, 1 of re-records and 1 of odds and sods, and then sell them directly to fans. We've also done vinyl of 2 of the albums of new material, and Bandcamp's relatively modest revenue split means both pressing runs paid for themselves very quickly, and we arranged the pressing and fulfillment of orders ourselves. Streaming, says Ant, just isn't a thing for an artist like us. We've got a small but very engaged audience. They actively want to support what we do, and routinely releasing stuff onto streaming platforms for us would just be pointless. We're just not going to earn anything, and it might even directly cannibalise some sales of the actual records. Granted, we're not full-timers and the smallest are small-time, but I'm not sure we'd even be making music as a band anymore without Bandcamp. And this is an interesting point, actually, because I suppose we do, I mean, quite often we're looking at the music industry, we're looking at the machine, I guess, quite a lot through the eyes of new artists or ambitious, aspiring artists, and less through the lens of either, I don't know what you describe, a heritage band, or at least a band who've been around for a while, or an artist who never wants to play the co-op arena and is, absolutely content in playing their music in places where it feels comfortable to them, and they just want to sell records to what is probably quite a tight-knit, loyal following. And just selling direct to your super fans means Bandcamp is a way you can do that, would you say?
Definitely. And I'm really glad because, I regret we haven't talked about Bandcamp a lot, because I love talking about Bandcamp. And it's one of the things that if I was talking to an artist going, what do? I'd be like, look at Bandcamp. Should we explain it for people who haven't come across it before? Because there may be some people listening. Mm-hmm. So it's, in one sense, it's like a platform. It's like a site where if you're an artist or an independent label, you can create a store to sell music and merch. And so the dry way of describing it is like it's a D2C platform, direct to consumer. So you're selling stuff to fans with no one else in the middle apart from the store. But it's like more than that. It's like a community of people who get that idea of buying stuff to support artists they love. So that's the powerful thing about it. People might register because an artist they like is using it, but then they explore, they buy more, and they've always done a lot of work Bandcamping. They have a blog recommending music, and then during COVID they started this thing called Bandcamp Fridays, where they kind of waive their fees so that artists keep all the money. And it was kind of a way of giving back to artists. So it's always been, it's not just like a dry, you can set up a store thing. It's a community of people who care about music and want to buy stuff from artists to help them succeed. And they take about, if you sell a digital album there, they take 15%. If you sell physical goods, take 10%. And then after payment fees, around 82% of the money goes to the artist or label. So it's quite good from that point of view. And people have paid artists and labels, I think it's this is maybe an old stat, but $1.33 billion using Bandcamp. And the last year when it said it was 194 million, which it's really tiny in the scheme of things. Like $194 million a year is like 0.7% of global recorded music revenues. But it's hugely important, like a lifeline at the macro level for the artists like Collapse Lung, independent artists, whether they're new and upcoming or whether they're kind of heritage. For them, it like Ant said, it's the difference between carrying on and not carrying on. So it's good. And do you know when we did that show in Sheffield, actually, and someone from the audience said, "What's your advice?" And I said, "Mailing list was my big piece of advice." After the experts spoke, I was like, "Also mailing list." But mailing list plus Bandcamp is a really powerful combination for artists, I think, where you have a way to communicate to your fans and you have a place you can sell them stuff. And like Ant was saying, you can put new music on there, but you can also collect demos, rarities. You can do new stuff. You can use it as like a regular place to release music rather than just sticking your old albums on there and leaving it be.
Mm-hmm.
So it is like I don't know, it's like a garden, really. Like it's something you nurture. You don't just kind of put your stuff on there. You go on there and nurture your fan base, and you kind of give them regular things, and you do money off things. When Bandcamp Friday rolls around, you do something special and cool for them. It's actually nice. I think nice you might know it. Do you know Laura Kidd? She used to be She Makes War.
Yes.
Now she's Pen
Yeah,
Friend.
I do.
Because I know her, but I also get her stuff, and I see how she uses something like Bandcamp with her mailing list. So I'm doing this thing. It's Bandcamp Friday. I've released this new album of stuff. You can, as an artist, you can really lean into it. So it is really good, I think, and it can really work, and it can be a thing where you just gather those fans who want to support you. So yeah,
I think you're right about the mailing list thing, because it's a different sort of mailing list these days, isn't it? But I mean, I'm signed up because you can sign up to essentially follow an artist, and they can send you alerts of when they've put new music up or they're doing something interesting with limited editions that they're making physical products of. And I mean, I regularly get an email saying, "Oh, there's a new thing from," because I follow there's a couple of record labels that I follow on Bandcamp as well as everything else, and it's always nice to know, because if you're following someone whose music you've liked in the past, I mean, it's an algorithm type of thing, isn't it? Really, that what you're doing is, if you've liked something from, I don't know, Specialist Subject Records is one of the people I follow, and you've liked something that they've done before, then they'll probably, their next release might well be something else that you'll like, so you go back and then you buy that, and so it continues. But you're right, it helps exploration as well. I think.
It's had a weird recent history, because it was bought by Epic Games, who are the company behind Fortnite, which was a really random sounding decision of this games company buying this music stores service. And then they sold it on last year to a company called Song Trader, who's a music licensing company. And there were quite a few layoffs at Bandcamp at the time, and lots of worries in the community, like, oh, is it going to go downhill now? What's going on? But Song Trader's been very keen to say that it's committed to it and it wants to kind of build it, grow it. So that would be interesting to hear from other artists using it, I think, who are listening, since that acquisition, how has it been for you? But it is. It's the other thing I think that Ant mentioned was this idea of streaming. And I think streaming can still play a role, as can socials. Like, if people find you on Spotify, if people find you on Instagram, the task is, right, bring them over here to your mailing list, bring them over here to your Bandcamp. So those things can still be a shop window. Like, I guess for Collapsed Lung, I mean, Eat My Goal's the obvious one, isn't it? The track they did that, especially right now with the Euros, people might be listening to it on Spotify and discovering, oh, who are Collapsed Lung? And it's the case of, if you can then follow them and say, oh, they're over here on Bandcamp releasing new stuff and doing cool things. So I think that is a task for modern artists who are independent, is where is the thing that you control that is giving you good revenue? And then how do you use all those bigger platforms to kind of bring fans who hear music and like it over to those places? So it sounds like Collapsed Lung are doing it really well. But yeah, like, if you're independent, definitely look at Bandcamp and see what you think of it. But I guess also tell us what your experiences are.
Yeah, and also add some. And by the way, anyone listening, any of you who've got any additional information for any of the questions which we've answered, and we might have missed something out, do get in touch, because Stuart says your own experiences and insights are often very helpful. Because, I mean, part of the reason this podcast exists in the first place is to help musicians navigate the music industry. So we'd be delighted to hear from you. But Anne also mentions, and this is, remember, we've covered the subject of PRS and PPL payments quite a lot recently, but Ant says, just for reference, when we mention royalties, PRS and PPL payments are split between the songwriter and performer, right? So if the writer has a publishing deal, the PRS get 50% of it. So one half goes to the publisher, the other half of that royalty goes direct, though, to the writer, which is handy. PPL is the same, but it's split between the rights holder of the recording and the performer. So the record label will get half, the performer will get half from the PPL payment. Unless if you don't have a publishing deal, obviously you get all the money from PRS. And if you own the rights to your recordings, then you'll get all the PPL money. Does that make sense? I think it does.
Does, yeah.
Yep. Okay. And I mean, this means once again, I mean, we were talking in the last episode about a certain bunch of Eurovision winners, and occasionally, at least once a year, their records will get played on the radio. I mean, that's probably going to bring in quite a significant amount of royalties, which goes straight to the artist. And this is the great thing, because you'll get money from PRS and PPL regardless of whether you've paid back your publishing or record advance.
This is one of the things in the recent debates about streaming that some of the campaigners like Tom Gray have said that kind of approach should be applied to some streams. The streams that are most like radio, an artist should get money direct. And that's what they were campaigning for, but the government eventually said, no, we're not going to do that. But that's that whole argument that streaming should be a bit more like radio.
Another reason, though, to make sure you are signed to the collection agencies. And following on from that, question from Ian Beresford, who says, you covered PRS and live gigs on a recent episode. So is my understanding correct in that if a cover is performed during a live set, then the writer of that song, the original writer of that song, gets money from the gig? I mean, in theory, the answer is yes, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, they should.
Short answer, yes. Longer answer, if it's reported correctly, so whoever has reported to the Collecting Society what songs were played that night, if that's reported accurately, and also if the data the Collecting Society has is accurate too, if they know who wrote the song, who their publisher is. So there are some ways money goes missing if the data isn't correct on either end of that. But yeah, if your song is covered at a gig and it's being reported, you should get money. Royalties.
Yeah, I mean, if the Foo Fighters cover your song on tour, then that'll be reported. That's it. I mean, at the large scale gigs, where all the set lists are written down and handed on, because then the organisation is terrific. Then I mean, that's not going to slip through the net, is it? It's just the further you go down the scale of venues, then the more unpredictable the reporting, I think, might be.
Yeah.
But I've never have I mentioned this story before? I won't say the name of the band, but I know at least one early 80s British punk band who released a song which has been, over the last 20, 30 years, has been regularly covered by one of the biggest metal bands in the world. And they have definitely received some very hefty royalty checks from their song, which I think was a B-side of a single. How this band came to cover it, I know not. But every time they do it, and because the rates are based on how big the gigs are, that's what you want. You want somebody who's stadium-sized to be covering your song, because that's where the dollar is.
And actually, when you're that size artist, often there is this kind of, they want to sort of pay homage to the things that inspired them / establish their credibility. So that idea of picking a deep cut from an older band, it's not that unusual. So there is this, some bands just have this kind of sudden windfall of like, I don't know if Taylor Swift's doing it, but Taylor Swift would be the ultimate, wouldn't it, to get her covering your song if you're an early 80s punk band. I don't know how that would work, but I want to hear it.
Thank you very much, Ian, for that one. Question from Lanzel Ochoa. During Sky's Premier League coverage, pop songs are regularly used as de facto theme songs. Previous songs have included Tiny Tempers, Written in the Stars, and Kasabian's Club Foot, with Celeste's Stop This Flame being the current choice. In fact, looking across the sports scene, I recall Charlie XCX's Blame It On Your Love being used on Football Focus. And probably, obviously, the most famous example of this would be Fleetwood Mac's The Chain and its association with Formula One. How are these deals arranged? Would the artists receive a flat fee at the start of the season, or is it royalty based? So is it based on each play? Any enlightenment into this process of picking these songs would be duly appreciated. Before we talk about how they get picked, explain how they get paid.
Yeah, so we did actually, Music Ally did a report with the BPI a few years ago on sports, and we actually had Sky Talk at the event we did for it, and they were talking about how them, and this is like a few years old, but this is how their music shaped up. So around 11% of their music, they paid composers to create original stuff. 26% of their music was commercial, so licensed from labels, and 63% was production library music, which again, you sort of pay for production library. And broadcasters have blanket licenses in the UK, so they can use anything, and royalties are paid like anything, any music that's played on TV or radio. They have a blanket license; they can choose what to play. But then some music is directly licensed. So something like Celeste Stop This Flame, which actually I think I was hearing in my sleep for a while when I've been watching a lot of Premier League football, because that it's used so prominently every single ad break that it was, in my dreams, Celeste was kind of singing. It's a good song, but it was a bit much in the end. And that's where they work directly, because partly because it's so prominent, it's used in title, but also they'll work with labels and artists to create kind of different edits and remixes depending on what they want to use it for. And that's where you do need to work with them.
Right.
So it's a mixture. You'll get kind of, if your music is used just in the show, you'll get royalties like you would if it had been played on the radio, but there are also direct deals being struck when they want to do more with it. And the percentages might have changed, but it was around a quarter of Sky's music then was commercial music. But I remember the guy saying we'd actually think there's room to grow that. We want to figure out ways of using more commercial music. So it may have gone up since then.
Yeah, it's down to budget, isn't it? I guess as to how much once they've worked out how much time they're going to need to fill and how many packages of the season's greatest goals they're going to run, working out how much money that they've got, and then splitting it between, as you say, cheaper production music and actual hit records. When it comes to how they get picked, luckily enough, a friend of a friend who is a fellow Colchester United fan works for BBC Sport. So I presume the other companies are, operate in a similar way. But at the BBC, this is what we found out. The music on different BBC football VTs, it's usually picked by the individual producers working on that particular piece. If it's a bigger choice, like the music for the tournament titles, then the creative lead or possibly even the head of BBC Football will then decide what music they're using. And for music regularly on something like Football Focus, which you mentioned, under stuff like the trail graphic, the choice will be made by the series producer or director. Those are the people involved in choosing the music, so it's quite hands-on. It's the people working on the shows. I know a lot of bands who got very excited every time one of their tracks was picked to be used in one of the goal montages on Soccer AM. That seems, for a while, Soccer AM made a point of choosing really interesting bands that,
and they get bands on, wouldn't they? They make bands part of the show and have them.
Yeah.
It's funny because it can be so kind of like for me, a goal of the month montage is "Life of Riley" by the Lightning Seeds, because there was that era when it was used. That's what, and then the chain is so associated with Formula One that I didn't know it was a Fleetwood Mac song until I was a well-grown adult. I just thought it was the Formula One track, which tells you about my music history. But yeah, it's weird because I think everyone must think I could choose tracks for Football Focus. I do a great job, but there's proper skill, I think, in what works with the action, what works with the time. It's a professional skill of knowing not just my favorite band, I'm going to stick them on in the background. It's what works for the footage. So it's a proper skill.
Rob Sharrod, loving the podcast. Thank you very much. Bless you, Rob. Thanks for listening. Says, I feel like we've heard a lot about Spotify, but as an Apple Music subscriber, I'd love to hear from someone associated with Apple Music, which is a good point. Anyone from Apple who'd like to come and talk to us, but they don't talk a lot. I don't think, Apple, do they? They seem they choose to have a much lower profile, I think.
Yeah, their culture is very much, they have their own events and announce things. They don't really do many conferences. They pick their interviews very carefully. When they launched, I did an interview with Jimmy Iovine and Eddie Q, their services boss, which is one of the most frightening interviews I've ever done. Because Jimmy Iovine was a little bit deaf, because he's a producer, decades long producer. I think he's a little bit deaf. Yeah. He misheard a couple of questions and thought I was being rude, and I was. And he started getting cross with me. And Eddie Q, who is kind of famously quite a scary exec in his own right, had to step in and say, no, he didn't ask that. He was saying this. And I'm there going, don't roast me. But yeah, Spotify does a lot of putting information out, announcing things, putting figures out. Apple Music goes its own way. So I'd love to get them on. But they're a different kind of culture in terms of public stuff.
But, Rob adds as well, and thank you to everyone who's been in touch on this subject. You remember that a few weeks ago we spoke about the Liam Gallagher John Squire gig, which had left some Glaswegian punters slightly miffed as they'd come on. They did the 10 songs from their album and a cover version of Jumping Jack Flash, and that was it. For the princely sum of, I can't remember the exact figure, but I think it was north of £50 for a ticket. So we were asking about the shortest gigs you've seen and the worst value gigs. Rob says mine was The Enemy when they played in Birmingham around 11 or 12 years ago. They arrived on stage half an hour late. And if my recollection is correct, I timed it between 40 and 45 minutes. The only saving grace was that the tickets were £20 each, which I'm still... a lot of money in them days, and it's still though. Hang on, my maths isn't very good. Is that 50p a minute?
Yeah, but do you think that could that have been a curfew issue? Do you think if they came on, say, half an hour late, maybe it was supposed to be longer, but they were told they had to get off by a certain time?
I mean, for a start, fine anyone who comes on late particularly out of choice. I mean, if your tour van is stuck at Spaghetti Junction and you're late, that's absolutely fine. But just faffing around and coming on late, I mean, that's a finable offence in my world.
Yeah,
having missed a lot of trains because bands have gone on late. No.
Do you remember we talked about Glastonbury last episode, didn't we? Do you remember when Guns N' Roses played Glastonbury recently, and they came on to the minute on time, and the sheer shock of everyone there, you could hear everyone going, "What? Hang on, it's on time."
Yeah.
But I've been doing some research on shortest gigs actually.
Have you?
Well,
right.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking of mine. So my shortest gig was actually a festival set. It was Daphne and Celeste at Reading Festival. If you remember that moment, they did two songs, "Ooh Stick You" and "UGLY." I was dancing, not throwing bottles to stress. They were brilliant, but the crowd weren't so keen. But so the official world record for shortest music concert belongs to The Who in 2007 in Tampa, 13 seconds. But what happened there was Roger Daltrey came on, realised his throat was too bad to sing, and they had to call it off. So that's I'm not sure that's a proper short concert. That's like a called off. But White Stripes, the same year, 2007, they played in Canada in a gig for 50 seconds. They played one note, and it was deliberate. It was like, they were doing this bunch of pop-up concerts around their tour. And so they did one. They were like, we're going to play one note, 50 seconds. That's going to be it. And that's going to be the experience. And the Jack White, before they went, said, "We have now officially played in every province and territory in Canada." So it's like ticking a box. But he was really cross. He was really furious that the Guinness World Records didn't count it. And there's a quote from him. It's like saying, "The Guinness Book is a very elitist organization. There's nothing scientific about what they do." He was furious that their 50-second gig didn't get into the Guinness World Records. But
why was that then? I wonder why because don't you have to contact them beforehand to set any records?
I think
and then there's usually loads of parameters around how you can do it and stuff.
Yeah,
isn't there?
I've looked into because everyone thinks it's easy to set a world record. You just do this, but yeah, there's a real protocol to follow. But I would have loved to be at that gig when the White Stripes came in and played one note. If it wasn't one you paid for, it's like a pop-up free gig, which is what it was. You saw that happen. It never happened again. They played one. And apparently it was like he gave Meg some instructions, but again, saying just hit the cymbal, then grab it straight away. Like it was properly planned. So I love that. And in my head, that's the record holder. They put some effort into doing the shortest concert.
I once, as you know, around the first couple of albums, I was quite a champion of the band Coldplay, and they were playing in New York, and quite early on. And I was really interested to see whether their style of music would work in New York at a time where a lot of alternative music in America was, ferociously loud and angsty. I mean, led by people like Limp Bizkit. And would this band, this much quieter band from the UK, how would it fare? So I paid for myself to go to New York to see Coldplay, and very much like that example you just given, Chris Martin, his voice went. So they did 3 songs, and that was it. So I'd gone to New York for 3 songs. and a very brief conversation with Chris afterwards, saying, how are you feeling? Sorry about this and everything, and him just rasping a couple of replies and then being led away by his manager. So we ended up in an Irish bar playing darts instead.
Well,
we should have
that's
been
worth flying to York for. Do you know, I've got a Chris Martin throat anecdote, because do you remember when they did that tour with Terrace really early on? Was it their first?
Yes.
And we went to see them in Ulu in London, and afterwards he got to speak, because they were the support act, I think, weren't they? Terrace were the headliner. And we met Chris Martin at the bar afterwards. And I was like, that was brilliant. I loved it brilliant, because I was very enthusiastic. And my best mate, who is a really marvellously honest chap, he was like, yeah, I thought you might have been holding back with your voice sometime there, were you? And Chris Martin went to this real, oh my God, could you tell? Oh no, could you tell? I can't believe it. I thought no one would tell. Oh God. And he had this sort of panic attack about, and I was like, you've spotted his buzz. But it didn't stop them. And then we saw them again at the Bratz Bus tour the week after, and made a point of going up to him in the bar and saying that was brilliant, and then leaving and not mentioning anything throat related.
If you got any other example, I mean, well, obviously, as we've said, I mean, it's all a matter of how exciting that short time is. I mean, you could see 30 minutes of the Ramones for £50, and it would have been worth every penny. But worst value gigs you've seen, and any other questions you might like us to have a crack at answering, anything that's always been bothering you about the music industry and how it works, especially in terms of where the money goes and who gets paid for what. Send your inquiries and your thoughts and your own stories to thepriceofmusicpodcast at gmail.com. You can also support the show by signing up to our Patreon page, where you can become a Price of Music fan, or indeed super fan, for as little as £2 a month. Just go to patreon.com/thepriceofmusic to find out more. We'll be back next week. Thanks a lot for listening. Cheerio.